Hello and welcome back for another Torah Tuesday. I'm Dr. Carmen Imes and we are continuing our trek through Exodus. We're in chapter 23 and today we're going to talk about verses 14 through 19. I'm going to begin by reading my translation of the Hebrew. 3 times you shall celebrate a festival for me each year. The festival of flatbread you shall keep. For 7 days you shall eat flatbread, just as I commanded you at the appointed time in the month of Aviv, for on it you went out from Egypt. Do not be seen before me empty-handed. The harvest festival, the first fruits from your labor which you planted in the field, the festival of ingathering at the end of the year, when you've gathered the produce of your work from the field. 3 times in the year all your males shall appear before me, the Lord Yahweh. You must not sacrifice upon what is leavened the blood of my sacrifices. You must not allow to remain overnight the fat of the festival until morning. The first of the firstfruits of your ground you must bring to the house of Yahweh your God. Do not boil a young goat who is suckling the milk of its mother. Okay, so this is the last section of the covenant scroll with laws about holiness in worship. Chapter 23 isn't over yet, but the laws that follow, or the instructions that follow, are more specifically targeted towards the generation that was at Mount Sinai and its instructions for their trip to the Promised Land. This is the last section of more timeless laws that are going to endure throughout the period of ancient Israel. There's a contrast here between what came before. So last week's video, we talked about not allowing the names of other gods to be heard on your lips, not invoking the names of other gods. And this is the contrast to that. You're not going to be worshiping other gods. Here is how you are to worship Yahweh. Much of what we see in verses 15 through 19 is paralleled in chapter 34, verses 18 through 26. There's a lot of links between the two. So the effect is a kind of literary frame, so that before and after the ratification of the covenant and the tabernacle instructions, we have a set of laws that are similar. This section begins with 3 times. 3 times you are to celebrate a festival for me. This is a bit of an unusual expression in Hebrew. Usually it would be 3 pa'amim, 3 times, and that's what we see in verse 17, where it says 3 times all your males are to appear before me. So that's the normal way of saying it. In verse 14 it says regalim, which is the word for feet. 3 feet you are to appear before me. And it is true that the word regalim sometimes is referring to the timing of something. In Numbers 22, it appears 3 times that way. And we have a kind of analogy to this in English, where you could be at a concert and you could be tapping your foot in order to keep time. So feet can be related to timing, and perhaps here it's the word of choice because these are pilgrimage festival. They involve getting on your feet and going to the place where the tabernacle will be set up. To appear before Yahweh is to appear before his tent with your sacrifices. So the 3 that are listed here are the festival of flatbread, otherwise known as unleavened bread. And we've heard about this one before in chapters 12 and 13. You can go back to the previous Torah Tuesday videos to explore those instructions. The harvest festival, which relates to the standing grain, the harvest of the standing grain in the fields, and the festival of ingathering, which relates to the fruits of the vine and fruits of the tree at the end of the agricultural season. So you might have noticed that it said that all the males are to appear before Yahweh, and maybe you've wondered why only the men. Women were welcome to attend the festivals. Deuteronomy 16:11 and 14 and 31:12 all make this clear. Women were more than welcome to participate. However, they were not required. Why not? Because women, in that context, would have been tied up with things like pregnancy, breastfeeding, raising small children, menstruation, and caregiving for older adults or for others in need. And so while they were welcome to attend, there was not pressure to attend. The pressure would have been inappropriate for women who were often in a position that such that travel would become difficult or impossible. Now let's go into a little bit more detail about these festivals. So first of all, the festival of Flatbread that we read about in Exodus 12 and 13. This is a 7-day festival that takes place in the month of Aviv. It's correlated with the Passover, so it commemorates the leaving Egypt. The Harvest Festival, as I said, relates to the standing grain. It's also called the Festival of Weeks, or using the Hebrew word Shavuot. And later it comes to be called Pentecost. So this festival happens 7 weeks later, 7 weeks after the Festival of Flatbread. And if you do the math, that's 49 days later, which is why we get the word Pentecost, which means 50. It's the 50 days after the Passover is the celebration of Pentecost. So it's 7 weeks later. This would have been in May or June. Aviv is March or April, so the Festival of Flatbread is March or April. Then the kind of May, June is the Harvest Festival on our calendar. This would have focused on the wheat and spelt harvests. Spelt is another variety of wheat. And it later came to be associated with the giving of the law at Mount Sinai. Why? Because after the Passover is leaving Egypt, and then some 6-7 weeks later, they're at Mount Sinai. I think it's 6 weeks later they arrive, and then they prepare themselves for several days, and then they hear the voice of God on Mount Sinai, giving them the 10 Commandments. So the timing works out so that the Harvest Festival would correlate with the time that Israel was at Sinai, receiving God's law. Finally, the Festival of Ingathering is also called Sukkot, which is the Hebrew word for tents or tabernacles or booths. So it's sometimes called the Festival of Booths or Tabernacles. And this one takes place in the autumn at the end of the agricultural year. It's 7 days after the harvest of vineyard and olive grove. And later it came to be associated with the wilderness wanderings. So you could see why that would be, because after Israel left Sinai, they wandered. So there's a kind of memory of Israel's history that takes place in these pilgrimage festivals. They are called a Hagga in Hebrew, which is a cognate word or cousin word to the Arabic Hajj, which is the pilgrimage to Mecca that Muslims take. So this is a similar idea in that it involves pilgrimage to the central sanctuary. Now, just following these festival laws, there are 4 statements that restrict certain activities, and they do seem, in my view, to be related to these festivals. They're related to sacrifice. So verse 18a, you must not sacrifice upon what is leavened, the blood of my sacrifices. Why no blood with leaven? 2 possibilities here. One is that blood is a purifying substance in a sacrificial context, while leaven is a defiling substance. That's one reason why they shouldn't be mixed. Another possibility is that blood is not consumable by humans. Blood is always prohibited in the food laws of the Old Testament, whereas leaven is sometimes consumable. When someone brings a loaf to God, they're allowed to eat and partake of that loaf. So because leaven is consumable and blood is not consumable, they shouldn't be mixed. Verse 18b, you must not allow to remain overnight the fat of the festival until morning. This is most likely because the fat belongs to Yahweh. It's not supposed to be eaten by worshipers. There's no reason to save it overnight. You can't consume it, so you should not withhold it. When you're bringing your offering, you should give God all of what you have. And the fat would have been considered the best part of the offering. It's the part that when you put it on the altar, it sizzles and smells so amazing. We should give God our first and our best. And that this is a symbolic of that. This involves a bit of a shift in our thinking as modern readers, because fat is often what we remove from meat to not eat because we're trying to eat a lower fat diet. The ancient Israelites did not have a problem with putting on too much weight. Their problem was having enough calories to sustain them through the whole agricultural year. So they would have been very happy to eat the fat of the sacrifices, and for that fat to have given them a little bit more, a few more inches around their waist would have been helpful in getting them through the hungry season. And fat would have also been used for other purposes as well. Verse 19a, the first of the first fruits of your ground you must bring to the house of Yahweh your God. The word for first here is reshit, and that could be translated first as in chronology or best as in quality. Most English versions render it as best. You should bring the best of the first fruits of your ground as a sacrifice. However, the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, renders it chronologically as first. And we can also see this in Deuteronomy 18:4. So that's why I've rendered it first. Verse 19b, actually all of verse 19 is paralleled exactly. It's repeated verbatim in chapter 34, verse 26. So it's interesting to have these, again, kind of bookends around the other instructions. But this one is super controversial. There's been a lot of ink spilled trying to figure this one out. So do not boil a young goat who is suckling the milk of its mother. There are many different translations or interpretive approaches to this. Do not boil a kid in its mother's milk is a more literal translation. Does this relate to a Canaanite practice? Is this God trying to separate his people from the Canaanites? If so, we don't really have any evidence of that. Is this only referring to goats, or would it pertain to all meat? Is it only mother's milk that's in view, or is it all dairy? Is this an inhumane practice to boil a kid in the milk that was meant to sustain it? Or is the point that the young kid is still nursing, that is, it's at its mother's milk? So do not boil a kid that is at its mother's milk. That is, you should give the mother some time to nurse her offspring and give him time to become stable and weaned before you offer it for sacrifice. This seems possible to me. This seems like a more likely interpretation, in part because this festival, the festival of ingathering, happened at the end of the agricultural year in the fall, which is also when baby goats would be born. And so perhaps that's why this is being regulated. That is to say, this relates particularly to sacrifice, not to food in general or meals in general. At the time when baby goats are born is when the people are going to sacrifice, and God says, don't rip a young goat away from its mother when it's still nursing to offer it as a sacrifice. All things in their good time. This verse has, of course, become the basis for kosher food laws observed by Jews around the world. Kosher laws prohibit the mixing of any and all meat with any and all dairy. You cannot have them together in the same meal. So a strictly kosher kitchen would have separate spaces for the preparation of milk and meat, and even separate dishes on which milk or meat are used. So when I traveled to Israel back in 2014, I was really surprised to see that our hotel had two different kitchens, one on either side of the dining room, and they solved the problem by having one kitchen prepare breakfast and the other kitchen prepare dinner, and one had meats involved and the other one did not. So I believe it was meat at dinner, which meant you couldn't have any milk. If you wanted coffee with your dessert after dinner, you could not put milk in that coffee because all of the cups that could have milk in it were reserved for breakfast. So you had to have non-dairy creamer, and all the desserts were non-dairy. This is why you're never going to see a Jewish restaurant offering a cheeseburger, because that would be mixing meat and dairy. This is a sincere and yet extreme way of trying to uphold God's instructions and ensure that we're not breaking those instructions. But I find it most persuasive that this relates particularly to the sacrificial laws because of where it appears in verses 14 through 19. So I hope that's been helpful and interesting to you. Next week, we'll dive into the rest of chapter 23 that give particular instructions to the Israelites who were at Mount Sinai that would guide them on their path forward to the Promised Land. Have a great week.